Hi, everybody. This is the In Depth Show, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. My co host for tonight, who is Lisa Theobald, is having a technical problem at this point, which is why we are a bit late. She'll be joining us as soon as she can get unsnarled. And my guest for tonight is Bob Hennelly, who is an investigative reporter and has been one for a very, very long time. And most recently, he is the author of Pastuk Nation, which is a very interesting phrase and really very descriptive of the state which the United States, is in. So we're going to spend a few minutes now sharing on Facebook, and then we'll come back in about 2 or 3 minutes, and we will talk to Bob. I'm sure our situation is going to become a very fascinating one in just a few minutes. So I urge everybody to help us out by sharing. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay, and hi, Dolores on YouTube as well as on Facebook. And we'll be back to talk to you in just a few minutes. Thank you very much for waiting. I think some of our folks have been busy on Facebook because we already have a number of shares. Hi, Elvira. Very nice to see you. And hi, Lana. I'm not sure where you are tonight, whether you're on YouTube or on Facebook, but I know you're doing us some good wherever you are. There is Lisa, still having trouble with her connections. I hope she'll be able to restore them. She's still having some technical problems, though. I'm just going to go into a few groups here, and I'll be right with you. So I hope everybody's having a good night. Okay, that should do it for me. Let me shut off my Facebook now and go back. Oh, Lisa's still having a problem. I'll take the promo away and get us into the broadcast. So thank you, Bob, for waiting.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, it's my pleasure. And thank you, Holly. and Elvira. This is an interesting thing. Oh no, we do have some people here from YouTube and some people here from Facebook. Okay, very good. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Yes, I have to agree. Elvira says, I'll take a glass of wine if you have one. Well, I have my usual 1 ounce. So there it is. So you can take a glass of wine, Elvira. And hi, Lana. It's great to see you too. And hello, Kay. It's great to see you as well. Okay, so Bob may want to tell us a little bit more about himself to give some more background.
Sure.
And I will certainly give him a chance to do that. Please, Bob.
Sure. So I guess I'm a reporter. I've been a reporter since I was 17. I'm 66. I write for a paper called The Chief Leader that's been covering working people and civil servants since 1897. Then in 2017, we broadened to cover public unions, private unions, the entire labor movement. Recently, we've been purchased by a gentleman named Ben August, who's committed to creating a national labor paper, which is something that's long overdue.
Sure is.
And so I also write for Salon, was with WNYC for many years, have been involved in the labor movement, and have a program every morning, 7 a.m. On WBAI in New York, 99.5 FM, 7 to 8 a.m. leading into democracy now. And have been just trying to hold great capital accountable my entire adult life, and fought both a personal struggle related to this, including a long-term battle with Wells Fargo over my family's home, which we lost, but we gave one hell of a fight. And so I just see that we're at a turning point now where, for the first time in my adult life, I believe that labor has some leverage, may not last long, versus capital. As I say to my grown daughters, sorry about the planet, but the labor market's looking up.
I like that one.
Right. And so, I mean, I'm an odd contradiction because while I'm considered as radical, I associate myself with Dorothy Day and the Catholic worker tradition. So it's a broad range, but we have to make it so that this country, if we know that labor is a problem, everyone is saying that there's a so-called labor or wage shortage. If you want people to work, you have to make it worth their while. So I think it's for the first time in my adult life, we need to stop taxing labor and people's work more than we tax idle capital. And so to me, and anything that doesn't flip that oppressive tax pyramid is not going to give us what we need in terms of the resources to meet the very serious existential challenge of global warming, not to mention generations of underinvestment in human capital, which are the people of the land.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us about Stuck Nation.
Well, basically, it was a reporter's notebook. It started when I was, I guess I came up through New Jersey and New York, covering local politics and local land use issues. I noticed that there was a certain nature that we were stuck in the sense that issues and problems would come up. The political, the power structure the people who were successful in it would articulate the problems, only sufficiently successful enough to get elected, and then would stay in office by pimping out the causes that they motivated their election. And this happened at the municipal, county, state, and national level. And so what ended up happening was that you had a political system that was really committed to protecting capital and the formation of ever larger amounts of capital to the disadvantage of the planet and the people and the natural resources on it.
Yes. And you see or you've seen, okay, the analyses that you've done suggest that our system just can't do anything right now for the people in terms of passing laws that are of benefit but to the people, because um, the financial forces have such great control
Right.
over the system. How did they get that control?
Oh, I would say that we have to go back to, and again, it's Stagnation. It's put out by Democracy at Work,
Yes.
Professor Rick Wolfshop, and it is under 200 pages. But I have to go back to,
And he wrote the foreword also to the book.
yes, it was very generous of him. And one of the things that I think is very important is to go back and look at the history. The foundation of this country includes some principles, historical principles that we can't ignore. Slavery is something that we are aware of, but also something called the doctrine of Christian discovery, which was the way that the Catholic Church permitted the European monarchs that were discovering the world, whether that be discovering the world existed, of course, before they discovered it. But what happened in that was that in order to keep peace among the monarchs and to keep advancing the interests of the Catholic Church, the hierarchical, patriarchal model, they would say that anything that a monarch found, whether it be a human being, a natural resource, through the doctrine of Christian discovery, they could lay claim to it. That includes human beings. So Columbus was empowered with this doctrine of Christian discovery. And when he didn't find gold, the consolation prize was slave labor in the Caribbean.
Yes.
And so this is the foundation of market capitalism. And people have to understand that in this country, not just slavery, but the doctrine of Christian discovery, which is still cited in case law to this day in treaty cases in the United States. And so what's happened is we have carried forward elements of this objectification and of labor. And slavery's found different iterations. People, for instance, we're not taught, but this is well established. Coming through the Civil War, the United States abandoned Reconstruction, cynically sold out the social change it committed to, let the South reassert itself through Jim Crow. And then, and we don't associate this with what happened, but I mean, one of the realities is FDR, to try to lift up the labor forces in this country, cut a deal with the Dixiecrats in the South, where all the wage hour protections, which we hail today as breakthroughs that were the foundation of the New Deal coalition, that's 40 hours a week, getting kids out of the workplace, time and a half. To cut that deal, FDR made a pact with the devil, the Joe Mansons of the time, the Dixiecrats, where they would expressly remove agricultural and domestic workers from any of those protections. And that is a straight through line from chattel slavery. And it continues in most states to this day in some form of special consideration with what they call a substandard minimum wage for agricultural work. And indeed, today, servers in restaurants in all 50 states who get a sub-minimum wage, imagine we call it that legally, $1 an hour, is a direct legacy of this form of suppression of wages and the idea that some people's time on this planet, working by the sweat of their brow, just doesn't deserve a living wage. And so great fortunes have been built on this, not just from slavery, but from the distortions that slavery set in place.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. But do you know about the federal job guarantee? The idea, okay, of the job guarantee?
But I think the other thing too is that one of the things we know is that at the end of FDR's tenure, there was a desire to bring forward. He had this awareness that we had fallen short in the economic piece. And the Bill of Rights, right.
The Economic Bill of Rights, right?
Right.
Okay, so now there's a movement, of course, to pass a job guarantee, okay, at this point, okay, a federal job guarantee. And the explicit idea about it is that it should be done at a living wage. Okay. However, over time, people have been associating it specifically with the figure of $15 an hour, which may have been a living wage when they first started talking about it in 2010 and
Right.
2011, but
Exactly
which is
right.
not now a living wage at very many places in the United States. I mean, maybe it still is in the poorest places in the United States, but it certainly isn't one in San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York or Chicago or
Right.
any sizable city.
Right.
So you have, that particular problem as well. But okay, I find myself still wondering uh, how you think we got to the place where our political system is stuck and cannot seem but to adapt so that we can solve our societal problems. For a long time, we were solving our societal problems sufficiently well to uh, to cope, okay, with a good many of them, and to progress and to become, a leading nation. Okay, and we emerged, from the Second World War, okay, as a colossus,
Right.
essentially. Okay, and in those days, we used to make fun of the French, okay, and the Italians because they had an immobilist political system
Right.
and they could never solve any of their problems. And then during the 1960s and 1970s, okay, and 1980s, they put into place robust social safety nets, okay, in their
Right.
country. Okay, they developed, a good degree of happiness, okay, in those countries and in some
Right.
of the countries of, of
And
northern
social mobility too.
and social mobility too.
Right. Right.
And we have stagnated
Right.
basically since the 1970s, and we seem incapable of solving our problems, okay, of adapting. Uh, how did we get to that place?
I think that it's also we have to look at the way the machinery that we inherited has built into it certain defects which keep the minority in control.
Yeah,
And that's not inconsequential. So, the Electoral College is an example. The way
it is.
that, right. And so, the idea that we have equal representation for the states, where every state, irrespective of its size, gets two senators means that when you have Manchin and Cinema have an oversized power in terms of the percentage of people they represent versus their role in determining the direction of the country. It's like Buckminster Fuller's trim tab effect, right? Like that little bit is
Yeah,
driving the ship of state. And so, in that, at the same time, you have an economic system that, as you rightly say, I think the 70s is where we track it, right? And I lived that. My father, I was from a family of six. And what began to happen is, and the charts don't lie, what we saw is wages actually decline and the ability of working people to hold their own diminish, even as women were pressed into the workforce, which meant a deterioration in general because people were working longer hours. And what they introduced was household debt. So, by creating an opportunity to borrow in a way that previous generations would have been scandalized by, they gave us a false wealth a sense that while maybe the family could pay for a little vacation.
hello, sorry, Bob. Hello, Bob. You're frozen. If it if you remain frozen much longer, the best thing to do is to go out and click the link to the live stream again. If you can hear what I'm saying, you may not be able to. I'm going to have to. Somebody's back. Okay, great. Okay, folks, we're waiting now for them both to come in. Modern tech is great when it works, but not always. Bob Hennelly is back. Here he is.
That was quick.
Okay, we made it. Boy, I don't know why you got frozen. That was a situation where you just kind of froze.
Right.
Okay, and usually that only lasts for 10 or 15 seconds.
Well,
But
we're back. So I remember what I was getting at is that this thing of having Americans get caught up in debt and the culture of debt, and then the financialization of the economy, so that, there was a period of time in American history where the banks served the economy. Well, that changed.
Yes,
So
it did.
now the economy serves the banks. And so at the same time, you have like the proliferation of Delaware LLCs, the idea of this ability for capital to develop this tremendous ability to go around the world in an instant without any accountability. And
Yes.
for it to be able to create a situation where it creates where nation states are competing with each other for a tax rate. So it turns governments into concierge for multinational capital. How may we help you? How can we make your stay enjoyable? So the entire power dynamic shifted. And so at the same time, massive amounts of money went into the political system, and both parties became totally co-opted by
Yeah.
these forces.
They have, except that there are some Congress people now
Right.
who are not taking any big money. Very few.
Right.
I guess 6 to 8 Congress people.
To start.
Is that a start?
Well, I will tell you that it's even a good news, and it's important in this difficult time. We do have to identify good news. So as a beat reporter in New York State, what I saw where a socialist cadre got within the city, the state legislature. So we have some serious thinking going on there, a relatively deep bench in this regard. They were able to raise taxes on the super wealthy by some $4 billion, which is supposed to be radioactive, and then turn around and gave $2 billion to undocumented essential worker households. That is something that is revolutionary, because it held up these people that had done so much for us, and basically did not get hung up as one of the problems we have in this country is we're relying on 11 million people who get exploited in the labor market because we hold back any kind of legitimate legal status for them. It's a little game we play, and we like to squeeze them. We like to be looking over their shoulder for ICE and then have them work in the meat processing facility.
Absolutely.
And squeeze them for all they're worth.
Yes.
And then not even take care of them. Like you're seeing right now, I'm working on some stories about this. The pushback that's coming from the Republicans on something like OSHA finally coming up with a workplace standard to protect people who work in meatpacking plants who died by the hundreds. I mean, this country has not come to terms with the toll on the essential workforce. I have some data. In New York State alone, the NICOSH, which is a nonprofit labor-supported occupational health think tank, identified 250,000 essential workers got sick with COVID.
Yes.
150,000 got asymptomatic infections, which means they got a positive test, didn't have symptoms, but that is on their chart for life. 400,000 people in New York State alone had an exposure. We know from the research 25% of them will have some long-term health consequence of varying severity. Multiply that times the country. Over 4,000 healthcare workers died.
Yes.
700 police officers. thousands and thousands of transit workers. And we are not discussing that. And many of them who we celebrated with banging the pots, are now disabled, and depending on which state they live in, fighting to get workers' compensation so they can get back to work. Because this country has 50 different schemes for worker compensation. And many of the same hospitals that didn't provide the safety equipment for these people are now fighting the nurses and attendants and doctors who are applying for workers' compensation today.
Yes, absolutely. It's infuriating. It's terribly unfair. Okay, it's terribly unjust. It means we have to change. The only way to do anything about this is for the political system to be changed and for the political system to do something about it. Because even though in the present situation, the business interests control the government, and the government seems to be captured by them,
Right.
still the government is the kind of beast that can be captured by us. And then the government has the power to change the economic system, to change, the distribution of power, to change also the distribution of wealth, not simply through taxation, but there are all kinds of things that can be done.
Monetary policy, as you know, right?
Well, not simply monetary policy, but unprecedented things that have never been done before. For example, you could have people change their currency. In other words, create a new dollar,
Right.
entirely, and specify an exchange rate, between the new dollar, and the old dollar. But to get the exchange, you would have to present, the dollars you have in some form. This would require the business interests to repatriate their dollars
Right.
from abroad and bring them here to get a hold of the new dollar, which of course they would need to have in order to do commerce in the international system. Now, that's not an idea that has been written about anywhere. It's just something I've been thinking through for some time. But it would definitely change the balance of power. There's Lisa.
Hey!
Hello. You're back.
Keep going.
Okay, we will certainly keep going. Okay, so that's one thing, that can be done. But there are other things. How would you get into a position to do that particular thing? Well, that's a problem. But one thing I think could possibly be done that might have an effect is to start a movement to dump the incumbents. Every incumbent who is taking any big money, at all, starting in 2022. If we were able to create a new movement, to do that, and that movement was successful, we could deliver a shock to the system that would change it. If we could replace, let's say, 150 Congress people in 2022 at once, and make clear that the reason for the replacement is because they're taking the money, the big money, that money would become toxic to campaigns, and people would quit taking that money. If you could replace 15 to 20 senators, at once, the same thing would happen to the senators. Once the money is out of politics because it's toxic, then people will have to start to listen to their constituents again and will have to begin to deliver for their constituents. Now, of course, this assumes that the new candidates, that get into politics would not be also quickly corrupted by the money, in some way. But as long as voters are willing to vote based on the simple rule that you throw out people who are taking money, then the money would not be able to get a foothold again. So I've been working with that idea, and I've recently started another show known as Dump the Incumbents. And that's the central idea for that show. It's supposed to be a way of starting but that particular movement.
So I guess my and welcome back, Lisa. So we should let you talk because you haven't been around.
Well, I am really interested in, because I listened to your interview from 2013. Okay, I'm really interested in picking up where you left off there in that. We're 9 years later. Do you still think that the offshore investment is as much of a problem as it was then, or more? And what are your suggestions on what we do now? Because
right.
I see that you're a fan of Dr. Barber. So am I. The whole movement, that moral consciousness and a third reconstruction. Tell me, where are you now?
So I would say that what's happened is we've seen an acceleration of wealth concentration. And so one of the things that, as a consequence of that, is that global capital is moving faster and faster. I find Bitcoin is going to exaggerate that. So the idea that people are, and we have a new mayor coming in, Eric Adams, who's making this like and the idea that you're going to now, in a planet that's dealing with such an energy and fossil fuel crisis, put all your chips and your wealth on something that requires faster commutation and consumption of energy. Well, that's another topic. But to give you a sense that that's the kind of thing we're in the middle of here, and we have not seen any kind of desire to break up these large forms of these banks. And so in essence, they've only gotten bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've even tracked where they've been able to get involved with corrupting credit unions. And you have this environment where there really isn't anybody standing up to them. And when you don't stand up to them, we know about bullies, they just get bigger and bigger. So one of the things that I see now is that, and this is where we connected on Twitter, we need to educate people about why it was that the $3.7 trillion plan shrunk to a $1.75 trillion plan. And the reason why that happened, and it's important also to stipulate, that's over 10 years.
Right.
And it's also
most people miss.
Right. And it's also to understand that we, without even blinking an eye, approve $800 billion a year in defense spending, which funded a further notice on war, which destabilized the planet with this largest refugee crisis since the Civil War, exaggerated environmental problems that were happening in Syria with water, blew up some of the most fragile places in the world, and created all kinds of tumult. And so that's what we got for investment. And here's the kicker. They almost lost the capital to people who were inside the country who were citizens of it. So that's how good the intel is.
Yeah.
That is such a huge failure. I mean, you have to own that. A culture has to say, yes, we thought that Muslim people were the problem, and we arrayed several $100 billion each year for 20 years, and a bunch of wannabe Confederates almost overthrew the United States.
Yeah.
You don't hear that on MSNBC. You don't hear, and who do we go to? We consult the same generals who took us down that path. Well, what do you think, Foreign Relations Committee? Oh, I don't know. How should we position? Well, let's send a ship between Taiwan and China and see what happens. Really? Like, who decided that was a good idea? Really? And so when you say to me where we are, I think it's even worse than people realize. It was shrunk from 3.7 trillion to 1.7 trillion because the elements within the White House that wanted to tax dynastic wealth and put in the step-up provision, they got vetoed. And the Democrats got all nervous because they wanted to say that if you were going to leave this earthly plane and you were Jeff Bezos, that the government should get a chance to tax that wealth before it goes to your people you're passing it on to. And so we lost the nerve to stop creating dynastic wealth. And that's what we're dealing with right now, is a scale of wealth that is going to permanently exaggerate the social and economic reality of this country.
Absolutely.
I'm 100% with you there. I will just interject something very interesting. I had a discussion with a man who spent years over in Afghanistan, and it was a one-on-one discussion where we met each other where we were. This was very recent. He told me that he was on the ground and his job was to teach the people of Afghanistan how to implement a government and how to build an infrastructure so that there were roads and everything else you need to extract whatever it is that we were over there to extract from Afghanistan. And he said, and it was never going to work. And I worked at it for, 8 years, and now we're home. And his other gripe on that was, and they keep cutting Social Security and Medicare. And he was very upset about that. Now, this is a military individual, right? And he was very, very upset about that. So I think what I'm trying to get at here is we're an extraction, we are going after natural resources when we do these military actions. And the MIC is also a way to sustain an economy where we don't produce enough. Our jobs aren't paying enough. We don't have what we used to have, like you said before in your interview. We've offshored everything, right? And the rest of us are standing around here going, $18.50 an hour, and I've got a master's degree in library science, like a girlfriend of mine, right? Or
Well, and people are responding. The good news is that, and it's important to put in the context that the labor movement is a shadow of itself because capital beat the bejesus out of it.
Yes.
So you're talking about only 10% of Americans are in a union. In the public sector, it's around 30%. With Ronald Reagan firing Patco, he kind of kneecapped unions. But grassroots, household by household, Americans are resigning from their jobs on a scale you can see from space.
Yes.
And that is a direct result of the existential crisis of a mass death event, which this country will not honestly talk about in its media, because the subtext of corporations is ringing the cash register, friends. And just like we saw after 9/11, when Wall Street had its near-death event, and the people I'm honored to cover, the first responders, the people of Lower Manhattan, were told the air was safe to breathe.
I know.
The EPA told them it was safe to breathe. Be good soldiers. Get the thing back up and running. And today, more people have died from occupational exposure from that air, and 50 to 60,000 people are on some World Trade Center health program long-term problem. So when people say, why are the civilian workforce skeptical in New York City about taking something that government recommends? It's because of lived history. Now, I'm vaccinated, and I will get my booster. But I'm here to say that you can't be so disassociative not to say that the same pharma companies that were exalting as being the saviors of humanity were in the defendant stock and are still in the defendant stock for what they did with opioids. It's the same crew.
Yeah, it is. It is. And on that subject, I'm from Pennsylvania here, right? I'm still trying to figure out what happened with that plea deal with the Sackler family. Okay. Which is, this is part of the reason why I'm a healthcare activist, Bob. And this all ties in. Every state's contaminants is part of the reason why we have regional insurance healthcare networks, so that you can't see the proprietary information that would aggregate and tell you, oh, gee, this is, look at the contaminants here and look at the disease manifestation here.
Right.
That's all part of it.
Well, and I would say also that the underinvestment in human beings in this country. So I have covered for the last 20 to 30 years, one hospital closure after another.
Yes.
And so I'll give you an example. So Elmhurst, Queens was the epicenter for the worst part of the pandemic, which I covered. It was a failure of a hospital. The death overcame the facility. But the backstory there, and this is where it comes down to old-fashioned granular reporting of being on the street in these places. I know career FDNY EMT people who worked their whole life. There's a gentleman that passed after 30 years of working in Queens. I talked to his commanding officer. I asked what had changed. He said 6 hospitals closed around Elmhurst Hospital. So you have to look at the crisis that happened in the pandemic as a slow motion car crash that went on for decades.
Mm-hmm.
You have a country that let the life expectancy decline, count them, 1 year, 2, 3, before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, if you were a developing country that had to account for yourself to the IMF, they'd be saying, before we give you that loan, about that declining life expectancy, we need to have an improvement plan from you before you get your bunch of loans. And nobody raised that as a concern, as more and more people just died when they didn't have to.
Oh.
Do you know the last time that happened, that kind of decline, was before the Spanish flu and the First World War. Somehow in this country, it became accepted. Coming out of, if you go back and look at the public health literature, there was an awareness coming out of the great influenza that health was resided in the community. The healthcare medicine really advanced. It went from leeches in like the 16th and 17th century to genetics, to then understanding during the Spanish flu that, if you have someone that is carrying coal on a cart and they bring it to the house of the guy that owns a coal mine, if the poor guy that's dumping the coal off as a blue-collar worker is sick, he's going to get the owner of the coal mine ill and they're going to die. That understanding, that fundamental biological understanding, that irrespective of class or wealth, that we're connected, that is the thing that we came to understand. We put in place public health measures. We invested. We put schools, we put nurses in schools. That's a good idea. Let's forward deploy nurses in school. What did we do in the last 20 years? We decided, you know what? Every nurse doesn't have to be in a school. We can have circuit nurses. And so in this modern country, nurses would go from place to place and spend a couple of hours. And then when they were there, they were busy administering pharmacology, which had become ubiquitous for a population that had become dependent on all kinds of pharma products. So that's kind of where we are. And so people, it's important now to look at what we call excess mortality. There's a heat map. This is why Build Back Better needs to have driving it an evaluation of where there's excess mortality. We know that excess mortality in places where it's highest was where the medical system was most deteriorated.
Sure.
And where do we see it? We see it in urban core areas, in communities of color, and in rural areas where we close the hospital.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. I worked on the decennial this past year in an ACO here in Allegheny County. It's our job to get into those low response areas and be able to get to those individuals to fill out their census in a pandemic. Okay. Rob, I learned more about, I know exactly how to look at those maps across the entire country, and I can tell you by looking at them, I know who doesn't have the internet, I know who's poor, I know who is gerrymandered, I know who's been disenfranchised, I know where regentrification is happening. I mean, I can tell by the response rate, and we had to get in there. And the way that we got in there was through on the ground, local, and I mean local, sometimes block by block, community outreach organizations, your community watch organizations. I went to the watch commanders of the police officers and talked to them, of the police stations.
Did you find that empowering?
I did, but I can't get anybody to want to replicate it. I can do it now.
Well, so I would tell you that part of Build Back Better, and that's why there's a lack of imagination in all of this. One of the things that what we need to do is do a damage assessment at the granular level involving citizens across this country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give you an example. There's deterioration throughout this country in the housing stock. In every block, you can find a zombie home.
Yes.
That's the level of granularity. So one of the things we need to do is make work that's meaningful, that gives people a sense that they're moving themselves and their forwards communities together. And that's an example would be in New York City. We have like 50, 60,000 homeless people. There are houses and apartments that are deliberately kept off market, and many of them with tax subsidies. And so what you need to do is conduct a house by house, structure by structure assessment of what's going on. I've been following very closely what's going on in Cleveland. That's what they've kind of done to bring that community back. We have to act like this country mattered block by block. We have to uplift neighborhoods as if they mattered, and we have to flip the script so that they're driving the policy and not the other way.
Exactly. That I can't agree with you more. And one of the other things that you had said was that we used to have a moral conscience, that we were responsible for our communities and our neighbors, the children, the elderly. And I will tell you of my experience, I was displaced like my generation was. There were no jobs in Erie, Pennsylvania when I graduated from high school and, went to college, and where am I going to go from here? Well, it certainly wasn't back home. And most people in my generation, or even my decade of graduating, we never went back. We lost the ability to have our parents there to take care of our kids when we were going to work. We lost those conversations on Sunday evenings that bridged the generational discussion between my parents on Social Security or Medicare, and us going through the ACA implementation and being put in networks and HSA plans, high deductible plans, maximum out of pocket. My mother was on 2 hospital boards when she was a professional. I talked to her, 10 years ago, starting to talk to her about the ACA. It was like speaking Greek to her because she was out of the profession and couldn't imagine that what was going on while she was in it to what happened after the ACA. She couldn't even comprehend.
Well, one of the things is by having our life be focused on making a living and struggling to maintain the basics, and we were talking when you were offline about what happened was with the decline of wages and the earning power of average Americans who only have the time of their life to sell in the form of labor, was that insidiously Wall Street offered credit and found a way for people to basically make themselves like the Borax Mule team. And that's what we've had in this country. Hasten, put them all up, harness them all up, and have them build the pyramid. And don't have them talk among themselves. And so now this rejection of the Great Resignation is people's desire to reestablish the balance of work and life. And it also has to do with that this system failed them.
Yes.
And this system has to be held accountable. And I'll give you an example about not making things. And this is why this is such an important piece of stagnation. Early on in the pandemic, in January and February, I was tracking, because I cover the New York City subway. Workers who worked in the subway read the Financial Times. Yes, working people are aware of the world. And they read. And they started wearing masks because they knew it was happening. And they were threatened with being written up because they were going to scare the customers, and it wasn't part of their uniform. And I asked Bill de Blasio in March in the Blue Room about the mask policy. And at the time, the CDC said, save masks only for clinicians and sick people. Well, people don't need to wear masks. At the time, nurses were holding press conferences, which we reported on in the Chief Leader, and I wrote for Salon. They were told by the CDC the clinical training for nurses and health professionals is disposing of an N95 mask after each clinical encounter.
Right.
They were told to adopt it as a pet and to put it in their lunch pail and bring it back and forth. And they predicted that a few things would happen. One, they would die from the disease. They would bring it home to their families, and the hospitals would become vectors for the disease. And my friends, that's exactly what happened.
Yes.
It is what happened. It's exactly what happened.
Let's go forward. not to put too fine a point on it, while we're banging the drum saying we love you, we love you, May 5th comes along, this just passed, and the CDC, not consulting the unions or anybody, decides we're going to lift the mask mandate universally if you're vaccinated in indoor spaces. And at the time, the nurses said, you have many places that are not vaccinated. You're going to put workers at risk, and you're going to create the spread of a variant. And guess what, sports
That's what
fans?
happened.
Yeah, that's
So
exactly
all
what
I'm
happened.
saying, right? And so now, what I think needs to be this whole business about holding up an OSHA standard, we really need to talk about the toll on the essential workforce and not discount it. And that's the problem. And so as long as we're in a country that says you just have to suck up that kind of risk, we're going to have people say, you know what? I'm going to pass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I feel this way to my bone. We are cheap, desperate labor for the corporations right now, and anybody else, right? Whether it's small business or large business, the attitudes have always been, what do I need to give anybody any raises for? I'll just lay them off. There's somebody banging on the door to take that job. That's changing right now, but we're still in this situation where the productivity has gone so sky high that I'm wondering how long that trade-off, where's that sweet spot? How many people have to, general strike, not, quit their jobs, whatever. There is a hell of a lot of cushion for these corporations to hold out.
Well, I would say one of the things that's happened in this, when you get to granular reporting, people had to come up with, this was a crisis situation where, I'll give you an example. Somebody is in their 50s, they had a working life, they were going out of the home to work. They're like me, like a grandpa age, okay?
Mm-hmm.
They're living in a household, they're in close proximity with a family, their son or daughter who has a child. Many of those people were drafted by necessity to begin to do homeschooling.
Right.
When we were, and this kind of sounds like an anarchist syndicalist situation, in that the state failed, it collapsed, really, to be honest, right? I mean, all they had was lockdown. You can gussy it up all you want. And so people had to turn to their essential selves. And that's what they did. And they came up with familiar relationships to support the crisis, to endure it.
Right.
And I don't think they're going to be so quick to throw that away.
Yeah. I mean, it's better in a lot of ways. And when you're not working, when you don't have two parents in the house working, all of a sudden you start to realize, holy hell, were we spending a lot of money because we both worked? I mean, it is a percentage that neither one of us can really wrap our heads around.
Well, I will tell you, right, I will. This is, I haven't gotten into this in my writing, but my personal life. So just, and I think the only way we can talk about this in a way that's authentic is our experience, right?
Right.
Our direct experience. There's a reported experience, there's anecdotal, and then what you live. And so we had a situation where I am, my wife is a civil engineer and an attorney. I am a journeyman reporter. I didn't get a college degree. I went right to work in the world of journalism. And so when it came time for the kids to go to school, I worked from home. And we took a hit. So in the 90s, I was at home with my daughters, raising them. And so one of the things is that in terms of the gross national product, it looked like the nation took a hit. We were making less money. Right. But I submit to you, the quality of life improved.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's the problem. They can't square their head around. We wanted a better deal, not a new deal, a better deal. Mm-hmm. And that's the life-family balance. And so this is what was driving the conversation in Occupy Wall Street. But unfortunately, we have bought into this idea that never-ending economic expansion is a measurement of societal wellness. And it is not.
No, it's not. It's definitely not. I mean, I graduated. I had to go back to school after Reagan pulled the guaranteed student loans. It took me 11 years to go back and get a business degree. My first degree was, I was a junior getting my psychology degree when I ended up in default, literally on a Wednesday from a Tuesday. Anyhow, all that said, I went back into school, came out, and Wait, we were talking about Occupy Wall Street. I'm
Right.
sorry, I lost my train.
You went to college, you came out, you went back into debt, went to go get more education.
I did, and we were talking about Occupy Wall Street, and I'm trying to remember what I lost my train.
So I want to ask you about the student debt thing. Did you have a lot coming forward?
Yeah, a lot is relative at the time. I mean, I was back in the mid 80s in school, right? And I was going to a state school. I think it was $1,800 a semester.
So you had mentioned, I think one of the things that fell off the table somehow, we must have rid of student debt. Like that's another piece of this. And somehow, I don't know, they thought we were busy. Like that and here's the crazy thing. What we are getting in the way of, and I'm in touch with 20-somethings because my kids are in the process of all these life decisions of getting married and having kids or not having kids. And we're not making it easy. We told kids to go to college and that we shackled them with all this debt. And this was a scarcity thing that came right out of Wall Street.
Yes.
This is a whole way of social control. Make no mistake about it.
Oh, absolutely.
And so, I mean, I went to a state school, Ramapo, for $350 a semester. If you keep your college costs down, you have time to make trouble with social change.
You what? I'm sorry. Say that again.
You have time to make trouble and social change. And I mean the right kind of trouble.
Right, exactly.
But if you're paying $25,000 a semester, your ability to go and organize, well, you're just going to stay in that borax mule team pulling forward to the expansion of the pyramid. And guess what? You're not at the pinnacle. You're at the very bottom.
Right. And that's what happened to me for that 11-year span. I think altogether I probably had $9,000-$10,000 initially. It took me 11 years to be able to get myself in a situation where I could put that in deferment and get back into school. Okay. Then I clipped up another 50 before I got back out into the workforce.
So think about all the deferred dreams of a higher nation and people just need to get angry.
Well, and they are. The question though is, Biden ran on forgiveness of student debt and he didn't do it.
Right.
I personally think that now, before he starts ramping up or whoever starts ramping up their next presidential campaign, right now, there's 43 million people who are in debt, student loan debt. And that could be a pivotal situation right now because the Democrats are in trouble. All of us out here know that they failed to deliver on everything, all of it. He ran on canceling student debt. He ran on a lot of things, but 43 million people could get direct relief in their household on Main Street with a stroke of a pen. And he
Right. And also, I think you'd see a lot of kids come out of the basement, the 20-somethings. And the other thing, and this is something Dr. Barber mentioned, I think we got a sense of the lack of the level of disappointment we were going to have with the Democrats when they didn't pass the living wage. When you had, and it wasn't just Manchin and Sinema there, you had Coons, you had the Delaware faction, basically betray working people. And this is the point that Reverend Barber's been making. There's a sleeping giant in America, which is the working families, the tens of millions of American households at the $50,000 level and below. And that was the critical group of people that turned out that put Ossoff and Warnock in the Senate in Georgia.
Yeah.
And I will tell you what doesn't look good is here in New Jersey, where Governor Murphy almost had a near-death political experience, winning by some 35,000.
He was supposed to win.
And here's the key thing: they didn't mobilize the base, and I saw the same demobilization I saw in 2016, where in districts where African Americans empowered by the chance to vote for Obama turned out in 2016 dealing with foreclosures in their own community.
Right.
They were all out of hope and change. They didn't hear what they wanted to hear, and they stayed home. And that's the important thing here is that history is a confluence of things. It's not just the the rise of the reactionary and resentful racist right. It was a demobilization of the Democratic coalition that didn't feel that they were being engaged. And that's what's happening now. So Murphy, in the middle of this pandemic, goes to his Italian villa. When there is and that's when Chitterelli, the assemblyman, began to close the gap. In the middle of the State Department saying, don't go to Italy, Murphy went. We now have the message of Joe Biden going to Nantucket.
Nantucket, yeah.
And I wrote about this in Salon. Nantucket is our future. This is a place where all the homes remain empty and the people, a growing number of undocumented people, live there to serve the wealthy, can't afford a home, and are struggling. Nantucket is America, a gated community where you struggle in the margins. And that's where he spent his Thanksgiving, totally disconnected from this. And this is where I go. And this is what really kind of gave me a sense of how bad it was. Fox News and got the medical assessment from Nantucket Hospital, which was like a progressive document that showed the struggling nature. You know, each hospital has to do a needs assessment.
Right.
Fox News was quoting the desperation of the people of Nantucket and juxtaposing it with where Biden was spending Thanksgiving. And then the topper, and then I'll be quiet for a while, was $100 million from Jeff Bezos to Obama's foundation. Now, I mean, come on now. I mean, MSNBC has to snap out of it. Someone has to ask President Obama, he should give that money to the organizing effort for Amazon. Like, these guys can't have it both ways.
Well, but they can, because look at how long they have. See, this is what I'm afraid of, honestly, and I will shut up after this because Joe needs to get in here. But when I was in school, okay, it was, you know, the only reason, and this was relatively new because I was in school in the mid-90s. The only reason that a corporation exists is to make its stakeholders money. Now, I was in a Jesuit university, okay, small, like one of the, I think it was the fourth best business, Albert School of Business and Economics at the time. We were like big time, hands-on. I had access to my dean whenever I wanted it and everything. And I was sitting there listening to this, and I said, when did we decide that? Now, remember, I'm a non-traditional student. I'm 11 years older than most of the kids in the class, okay? I said, when did we decide to make sociopathy a corporation? Because that's what we've just done. And I'm in a Jesuit university saying this to my prof, right? I said, I think we need to go grab the chair of the ethics department. This needs to be a discussion, if not today, at some point, right? Well, I blew that syllabus out of the water. That, and I mean, I can keep going, but that scared the derivatives. Derivatives were a thing, but not a corporate, how do we manage markets thing. When I graduated, derivatives were kind of like the cutting edge. By the time, 10 years later, we're securitizing, C-rated mortgages with AAA and selling them off in tranches and calling it great in 2004. Well, 4 years later, it all crashed.
Right.
And I will make lots of parallels from that scenario to what's going on in healthcare right now.
Right.
Only healthcare is worse because they own the healthcare delivery systems. They literally own them, and they keep reducing the costs, the expenses to run their cost centers.
Right.
Because guess what? They've got all your premiums. Now it's just, how do I hang on to the most amount of money?
Right.
That's what's going on.
Right.
Joe, come on.
No, that's right. We're trying to be,
Okay. So what I have to say is this. We know that this whole system is effed up. We know that it's terrible. We know that it's been terrible for a long time. And we can multiply examples of how terrible it is extremely easily. We all see that Biden's deciding to go to the hedge fund billionaire's estate and have his Thanksgiving there is absolutely, totally ridiculous. I mean, he has to be completely insensitive.
Malpractice.
Yeah.
Political malpractice. Okay, I'll tell you something else that's political malpractice, and that is not forgiving every student loan debt that's out there. And even those that are privately owned,
Right.
buying those and then forgiving them. Doing anything else is malpractice at this point. He has his back against the wall politically. He's got to do some things people really love. That's something, and by the way, Lisa, it's not 43 million people, it's 44.7 million people, 45 million people who have student loan debt right now.
Well, I might say that from the standpoint of Joe Biden has a special moral burden here.
Yeah.
When he was the senator from Delaware, it was his contribution to the Bankruptcy Act to make it that you could not discharge student debt by bankruptcy.
Yes,
so that crazy Marxist Mr. Powell in the Federal Reserve told Congress there was no earthly reason that should be set aside as some special sacrosanct thing that can't be discharged at bankruptcy.
Right. So political malpractice is what Biden is doing in not instantly forgiving that debt tomorrow. He's basically sacrificing 45 million sure votes for himself,
right.
Locking down 45 million sure votes. So apart from the moral aspects of it, okay, and apart from the economic impact aspects of it, which both are very important, there's just the political malpractice aspects of it.
Does he want to get elected or not? I mean, I'm seriously wondering.
Really stupid. The other thing he can do solely on his own authority is give everybody free Medicare coverage under the Social Security Act, Section 1881A of the Social Security Act, which allows that to happen when you have an emergency, a national emergency.
Well, do you think we might be an emergency? Oh, like 700?
Yes, I think the pandemic might be an emergency. Absolutely, I do. And it was declared a national emergency already. Trump declared it a national emergency. So Biden, at this point, can certainly say it's a national emergency. I'm giving free Medicare to everyone. Now, it's not the best of free Medicare. It's not the Medicare for All Bill, 1976, but everybody could use the free Medicare.
Now, I want to tell you that this is very topical because I just got there's something going in New York State. Our health coverage at the newspaper where I work, the chief leader, has exponentially jumped just this year. I mean, it went from for my wife from $400 to $900 a month, just like that. So I believe that actually the way to sell this is as a way of dealing with what we're going to have, which is a never-ending succession of variants of COVID. And we have to do what we have not done yet, which is to aim our energies not where we are now, not where we are yesterday, but where we're going to be in just a little bit of time. So a couple of moving parts. And again, big-time social policy is like changing the fan belt in an engine with it running. You're going to hurt your fingers a little bit. We have to look at the fact that we're going to have two things happening at the same time. We are going to have a sicker population. We're going to have chronically ill people on a scale that we've never had
before.
Exactly. 25% of the people that had a bout with COVID are going to have some kind of symptoms, ranging in severity, some not so bad. Some are going to be life-altering, and people will need support for the rest of their lives. Then you also are going to have at the same time this constant change and need to have addressing the shifting nature of the disease. Our problem is we have no idea of the nature of the health of the American people, because when you hear phrases like that aren't culturally relevant, like consult your physician. Oh, let me get it right around to that. Consult your physician. Really? Who's that? Was that the dry cleaner? The barber? And so it's instruction disconnected from the circumstance of the people you're giving it to.
Yeah, disconnected from the reality of their situation. And you've made it disconnected from the reality of their situation because you passed the freaking Affordable Care Act,
Yes.
which makes it impossible for people to have a rational healthcare
I'm going to
situation.
take you one other thing needs to be fixed. So now the music has stopped in America. And wherever chairs are left around, you're going to get a seat or not.
Right.
We have 11 million people that are undocumented that we exploited by ICE is going to get you, work extra hours. ICE is going to get you, work extra hours. That's the drill. We're going to have amnesty. We're going to have to say, if you were an essential worker and you brought me my breakfast, putting yourself at risk and your family, welcome to America.
Yep, here you are.
And so,
you're a citizen of the United States automatically.
It's going to, and I'll tell you that this has precedent because I wouldn't be sitting here, but it was my paternal grandmother who was a nurse during the influenza outbreak in the beginning of the century, who was a patriot of the United States as a consequence of being a nurse from Nova Scotia. We've done this. So we're not thinking big enough. We're not thinking bold enough. And here's the other thing about undocumented folks. And this flies in the face of everything you hear on television. I was a beat reporter in New York City. I covered it when there were 2,100 homicides a year. A year.
Yeah.
That's a lot of dead bodies.
Yeah.
Just imagine 2,000 pairs of shoes. If it hits like 400, the New York Post goes crazy. Do you know why those homicides declined? It wasn't that fact that stop and frisk was not part of it. It had to do with that undocumented families from places of economic misfortune and oppression in the world came to the United States and restored places capital had given up on. Because what do they have in common? Faith, family, and work. And with that, it's abundance. And we need to change the script from the scarcity mindset that capital drives to create competition and heartbreak and domination into a psychology of abundance.
Not only that, into a psychology of abundance, but also into an economy of abundance, because there is no limit. There is no limit on the financial resources that the federal government can give to the people in order to reduce the level, of inequality. Now, there may be a limit in terms of the economic impact, but so we get some inflation, but there are ways to fight inflation. Inflation is a minor problem compared to reducing the inequality that exists, in our society. And it is not so much a problem that money is overseas and is not actually repatriated to the United States, because the federal government does not need that money. It has a constitutional right to create all the money that it needs to fix our problems there.
Well, I would say that one of the other parts of this, the most sinister aspect of this offshore business aspect, is that by keeping capital offshore, then they go into the equity markets, and then also they squeeze out innovation by hogging up the capital that's available for loan.
Yes.
And that's the other piece of this. So they run on scarcity. Abundance is their enemy.
Right. Exactly. And
that's the way to
let anybody figure it out.
That's the way to get at them. Use the power of the government to get rid, of scarcity, and even the power of the banks. In other words, ultimately, it's up to the Federal Reserve, which is, after all, a creature of the government. It's a creature of the Congress. It can loosen credit as much as it needs to loosen credit to help us solve the business problems. It doesn't have to tighten credit, for business. It doesn't have to create, a situation of loan scarcity. It can create a situation of loan abundance if it wants to. But by the way, isn't that what China did, in order to build its country? That is exactly what China did, and we can do exactly the same thing here.
What do you think, though, Bob? I mean, you've been at this from a reporting standpoint and a ground up, and you're amazing, honestly, and I mean that sincerely.
Thank you.
But what do you think? I mean, the political climate right now, we can't even get a Build Back Better bill that's going to make a real impact, even though we
yes,
all
and
know
by
we
the
need
way,
it.
I did want to add that actually the opening shots of the Build Back Better bill were $10 trillion.
Yeah,
That's
they were
right.
10.
That's right.
And then they shrank to 7, then they shrank to 6, and then they shrank to 3.5 as the progressives continually retreated and refused to put their foot down and say, we're not voting for any bill that has less than $7 trillion in it, folks. Sorry.
Well, and then also the fig leaf, the business of wanting to redeem, and what's crazy to me is, so you have if he wasn't named America, and you saw what was happening with this ongoing low level insurgency, where you had an attempt to overthrow the government violently,
Well,
they are
yeah.
continuing to build up with any means that they can find the Republican Party somehow. Like, they can't dance without this partner, and so that whole attempt, Joe Biden holding on to the relic of bipartisanship.
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean,
that was
like,
so ridiculous.
really? Like, and
Yeah,
so,
that's
but to your
bullshit.
point, to go back to your very, the attitude is we have to work on multiple levels at the same time.
We do.
Mhm.
So one of the things that every opportunity that we have with people at any level, we have to build solidarity. If I
Right.
go to pick up something at the grocery store, depending if I'm at a Target or at a Home Depot or someplace, and someone helps me, and I will give them a tip. We're on a fixed income, but I want that conversation with them and saying, have you thought about a union? Do you have a union? We need to build this consciousness in a granular way. And
Yeah.
we can't let any conversation or opportunity, and my wife and I do this all the time. People think that we're busybodies, but particularly in this time of isolation, these are precious moments. And every interaction is a chance to improve our circumstance by letting down our defenses and the programmed things and building consciousness.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yes, I agree too. I think that is of the utmost importance. That has been a very important thing for the Red Berets movement, actually.
I bet.
Start
Yeah.
conversations
Oh, yeah, totally.
and to explain Medicare for all to them. And that's one reason why we wear the Red Berets.
Oh, and Laura's going to kick my rear end, but I don't have mine on. Sorry.
So anyway, I do have to get ready to go to bed and work in the morning. I actually have to work on Sunday and write something.
Bob, come back.
It was a pleasure and an honor to share time with you. It flew by, and thanks for thinking of me. And let's keep building on Twitter. Let's do that.
Okay, let's keep on building. Okay, at Twitter, and we will have you back fairly soon. Okay, if you would like to come back.
After
sure. And
I'll have you on. Welcome here.
I'm at Stuck Nation. I take direct messages at Stuck Nation, and then also the program BAI at 7 a.m. In New York, but it streams live. BAI is part of the Pacifica Network. These are community-based radio stations. We do have to build an alternative structure to the media that exists, because it has become,
Absolutely.
My brothers and sisters are fighting the valiant fight. You now have, that's something we didn't cover, but in my lifetime, I watched local news disappear. We shouldn't be surprised that we don't have a common set of facts when we absolutely decimated local reporting. You have Gannett owning daily paper. So we now substituted reporting that's authenticated by living, breathing professional journalists with social media that is driven, and as we know from the Facebook disclosures, designed to create suspicion and fear, because it's a way of driving profits and economic activity driven by fear. If you listen to the right-wing radio, which is now increasingly getting a chunk, like 770 ABC all over, they're selling gold and bunkers and ammunition.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the negative visualization of scarcity.
Yes.
Anyway, it's great talking to you guys. Thanks for having me.
You too, Bob. You're extremely insightful.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And I love to hear your insights.
All right, talk to you soon. Take care.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Bob. Thank you. He's amazing, don't you think?
I do think he's amazing.
Ah,
I think that was a wonderful conversation.
amazing individual. And I'm really glad that I got mad at him about his tweet so that we got him on.
Oh, we never did talk about the Build Back Better Act, did we, explicitly? But that's,
No,
I don't
but
think
you know what? It's got to go through the Senate, and the bottom line is it's not enough.
the
You
bottom
can't
line
go-
is it's not enough, but also the bottom line is that it's going to be cut even more. I don't see how it stays at the 1.8 trillion. But even with the 1.8 trillion, there were so many things in it that were temporary, and there were so many things in it that relied on the cooperation of the states. You know, the red states are not going to take the money from the various sections, okay, of the Build Back Better Act. Okay, because even the money offered them, okay, is not enough. These states have to come up with money on their own. The various parts are not fully paid for. And you know the red states are not going to buy into anything if they have to spend their tax money on it.
Well,
So,
and they never. A lot of them were offered all kinds of money to put a Medicaid expansion, and they didn't do. They wouldn't do it.
yes, I know. And they were offered more money to put in Medicaid expansion than is in the Build Back Better Act for the various services that they're
They can
supposed to
still
support.
grab it.
Yeah.
They can still grab it. It's not like they can't grab it.
The Medicaid, yes, but what I want to keep the focus on is that for the various services the Build Back Better Act, okay, is offering, there is less of a federal share, so there is less of an incentive for the red states to tie into that particular money, and they're not going to tie into it, and it's going to make the Build Back Better Act even more of a failure. Okay, and the Democrats did that because they used something like the Medicaid funding model. They thought it was a good idea to cut down the deficit spending by getting the states involved. So it was pure austerity budgeting that caused them to set up the program in that way. And it's a recipe for failure of the Build Back Better Act. Okay,
Joe,
so that's something we didn't get a chance to talk about.
I think that I'm running into my own allies, people that I love dearly, that are running into situations where even they will say, we want to get off of the dependence of federal funding, which you and I both know, and I'm going to come at this from my finance background, right? If the federal government doesn't, if there is money out there to bring into the states, to utilize to fund a program that the federal government is offering you, that's MMT. That's the whole point. If you're trying to establish a health, even a community health center, or Medicaid expansion, you want to take that money. You want to pressure your municipalities, your state governments, your governor, that you want that money in the state so that you can take care of yourself. Now, when you read about provisions in a bill or approval, what do they call it? Authorization for plan to be able to do X, Y, and Z, where every year you're going to have to go beg for the appropriation. Joe, I kind of am starting to get really honed in on how people have been thinking, oh my God, we're going to be able to do this. And then they didn't appropriate it the next year, right?
Right.
And then they didn't get what they needed. Or
Yes,
worse,
right.
you get a
And they're
taste of it
making,
one year and they kick it the next.
they're making a lot of assumptions here that these programs will prove so popular that they're going to get appropriations, okay, in future years. But if the Republicans take over the House in 2000, okay, in 23, they're not going to get those appropriations,
No, they're
okay, in
not. They're
future
not going to
years.
come.
And if they don't get those if they don't get the appropriations for further funds in future years, these programs that are coming now through the BBB Act are not going to survive.
No, and they're not. I mean, I think that's the dread that people have, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
let's be honest. Most people don't get this deep into this stuff, but those of us that do, I don't have any faith in this at all. I don't.
Yeah, I
It
don't have any faith in it at all because the way they've designed it.
and the fact that it's got to go through the Senate and they're going to cut it even further. But here's my point, and this is really where the rubber hits the road right now. Do not let these Democrats run on this damn bill. Do not buy into that. I don't want to see anybody let the Democrats run on some ridiculous passage of this pittance of what it was. It's a shell of what it was. It was supposed, it needed $10 trillion. 1.7 is nothing. They're going to gut it again.
Yeah, that is absolutely true, and it's a reminder of the ACA. Okay, when they
Yeah.
passed the ACA in 2010, they celebrated because this we started working for this 100 years ago. We finally passed something, the first time in 100 years, and they drank champagne over it. They danced in the chamber over it.
They all have their own health care forever guaranteed, so why would they give a damn?
Right, but the basic point is when they tried to sell that to people, who saw the celebration, they had no idea what the Democrats were celebrating about because all they saw was a bill that they weren't going to get any benefit out of for 4 years, and that they were going to be taxed before that for that program for 4 years without getting any material benefits out of it. That's all people saw, and the Democrats ran on that, and the Republicans killed them over that because when the ACA was first passed, it quickly became very, very unpopular in the summer of 2010. It
Not
was
with me.
considered
I missed that.
travesty back then. And that was one reason why they got slaughtered in 2010. And they were so out of touch that they didn't understand that in passing that and making such a big show of it, they were going to get slaughtered. And we have the same thing here now. They're convincing themselves that they're doing something great in passing this bill, even though they cut it down from 10 trillion to 1.8 trillion. And they're going to try to propagandize us and try to sell the public on the idea that they've made a magnificent accomplishment here. And the public is just going to say, fuck you guys. You don't
Yeah.
have understanding at all of what we are going through. And therefore, we ain't voting for you. We're staying home, or we're voting third party, or some of us are even voting for the Trumpists again because you failed to deliver. They don't have any understanding that they're failing to deliver.
I don't know, Joe. I think they do.
Well,
I think they do. And I don't want to be.
okay, I don't understand people who just look at a situation and say, it doesn't matter to us if we lose. I don't understand someone, okay, who is 80 years old at this point. I think he's 80 years old, okay, at this point. It's the last thing he's going to do in his life. And he's been given a chance to be the president of the United States and to improve things. And this man doesn't care if he's going to get just cut up for the rest of his presidency, which will probably end in 2000, okay, in 25, because he's giving away the Congress now by not doing the things that he has the power to do? I mean, he
Joe,
can forgive student debt. He can pass the he can give people free Medicare for all. He can take over the licenses of the pharmaceutical companies and spread them over the whole world so they can be manufactured in other countries so the variants will finally stop. And he won't do that. He can regulate the prescription drug prices and see that they are cut back. And the way he can do that is that if the drug companies refuse to cut those prices themselves, then he can socialize the patents. He can take over the patents. He can say, you cut your prices, or you're not going to have a patent on this anymore. He has the power to do that.
he does, Joe, but he's taken the most money from pharma and health insurance industry than any other politician on record in
I don't
history.
care. He's fucking 80. He can't take it with him.
Joe Biden has been a glad hander his entire life. It's in his fabric.
Joe
And
Biden,
I
Joe
don't
Biden
mean,
is an asshole. I don't understand why he didn't just sit home and eat ice cream.
well, anybody, it's a Peter principle type of thing there, Joe. And I knew, anybody from Pennsylvania will tell you, unless they're like, in La La Land, Joe Biden is a pro-lifer. He always was. Just, you want to know, and I'll say something else that's going to be really controversial, but I'm kind of at the point where what the hell does it matter? Hillary Clinton picked a pro-lifer as a VP. You want to know why women didn't vote for her? You want to know why she lost?
Yeah, because she picked a
Because
pro-lifer.
she picked a pro-lifer as a VP. So, hey, vote blue, no matter who, wake the fuck up.
Okay.
That's where we are.
That was one reason. Okay. But another reason is she stood up there and told people you will never have Medicare for all. And a third reason
At
was
this rate, she's
she
right.
waited far too long to repudiate the TPP and the trade agreements.
Well,
If
the
she had
only
done
reason
that right at the beginning of her campaign, she might have gotten a few more votes in the Midwest.
the only reason that she ever did was because she knew that she was in big trouble, and that was one of the things that she could let go of. Honestly, that's what it was.
It was one of the things that she could let go of in the campaign verbally. But she took so long to do that that everybody knew she was lying.
Well, I mean, come on.
I mean, she
Did
had to
anybody
start the
believe?
whole campaign season with a very, very strong statement about why the TPP was a bad deal and why she wasn't going to support it. And if Obama didn't like it, it was too bad. But she needed to do that. And she needed to say she was for Medicare for all. And she needed to say she was for $15 an hour. She
But
needed
you
to
know
do
something,
all
Joe, with
those.
the Medicare for all? With the Medicare for all, though, I mean, let me just be the woman that I am, okay? She fought that battle with Lindsey Graham and Mitch McConnell and all of those. Forgive me, but all of those
Ghouls.
men in there in the Senate who not only looked down their noses at her while she was trying to do this health care bill. This is back when I actually had absolutely no idea what she would turn into. But for a minute and a half, that woman busted her ass and tried to do something with health care that would have actually worked. She worked with Bernie on it, okay? And the way that those
She worked with Ira Magaziner.
let me get through this. The way that Senate treated her with that's how you got the woman that she is today. They dismissed her like she was worth nothing, okay? Now, I am no fan of this person that we are speaking of. I never voted for her, ever. I never liked her. I couldn't stand the corruption that was in play when the family was in the White House. That administration was a disaster. Whether you believed it or not, whether you liked it or not, you know, reducing or, running a surplus killed Main Street, period. The end. It was an awful, awful time. But he was
It
a
was
great
an
orator.
awful, awful time because when you run a surplus, you take money out of the private sector.
Yeah, yeah.
That's exactly what you do. You take money out of the foreign sector, you take money out of the private sector. And so during the 4 years of Clinton's surplus, the private sector was actually getting poorer. It might not have seemed that way to people because everybody could take loans on their houses,
Yeah,
and their
because they
houses were
opened up this.
supposedly going up and up and up and up and up.
Yeah,
But that was all paper value. It was getting set for a big bubble that burst in 2007. So
but
that was
that was like what I see right now, Joe, is that there are no regulations. The regulations are not there. There's no enforcement. There's no enforcement of the
yeah.
laws.
There's no enforcement of the regulations. There are regulations there, but they haven't enforced them for
They
ages.
won't enforce them,
Ages.
right?
No, they refuse to enforce them.
So I guess what we should depart with is exactly what Bob had said to us, which is this isn't you against your neighbor who votes red or blue. This is about what we need to do right now as a people to take care of one another and to unite on this front of you need to join a union. You need to support those people on those picket lines. You
Okay,
need to.
I entirely agree, but I also have to add that that's not that is something we have to do
Well,
because
you cut me out before I finished the list, but yes, keep
okay,
going.
okay, no, you go ahead. I want you to finish first.
Well, there's a litany of things, right? There's so many things, including dump your incumbent, right? Um, support your local state healthcare initiative, honestly, because there's no way that we are going to pull a switch and automatically from a federal legislature on down, we're going to get Medicare for all. Not right now. The bill is buried. Biden will not do it. It's not going to happen for way too long, and we are out of time. But if you support state initiatives, we can destabilize the insurance industry region by region. We can pool the money that is already being being funded by the federal government into the states. We can reduce the cost of healthcare by half or more for the businesses, by half or more for the people. No out of pocket, no copays, deductibles, none of that crap, and you will no longer have your employment tied to your health care. Those types of things are huge. Get on the bandwagon. Cancel all the student debt. Why? Well, if you don't like the idea of canceling student debt, too damn bad. Biden ran on it. So if you're going to vote for him, then you make him keep his promises, for God's sake. $15 minimum wage, and I'm going to be really honest with you, Joe, it should be 24. So, whatever. But if you're still needing that 15, because that more than doubles your 725, damn it.
The
Any
15 is a place to
money.
start. But the point
Any
being,
politician,
okay,
not
the
just the
point being
president.
is, okay, I don't know exactly what the medium living wage, the median living wage for the whole country should be, okay, at this point. In other words, it's a matter of computation. It might be $24 an hour, it might be $25 an hour, it might be $26 an hour, it might be $22 an hour. I don't know. But I do know this.
It's not 15.
It's not 15, and I also know that we should take the cheapest place in the country to live, the lowest CPI place, okay, in the country, and we should determine what a living wage is in the lowest CPI place in the country. And then we should scale a living wage in every other place as a multiple of that lowest CPI. So maybe, the lowest CPI, I'm just taking an example, might be $15 an hour. Then you move on to another place where it's 1.2 times $15 an hour, 1.3, 2 times $15 an hour. As high as you have to go for each individual place to get a living wage in that place. Everybody should have a living wage in that place. And that's the legislation we need for living wages. The other point that I wanted to emphasize, the very central point, of what Bob had to say tonight, I think, is we have to build solidarity and trust again in the United States, in our country. We have to begin to trust one another, to have
care about one another,
to have conversations, to come to a mutual understanding of what is necessary to get the mass media, the conventional mass media, out of our lives. They are toxic. And there are all kinds of things we can do to do that. But that is something we have to do, just in our daily lives, okay, and on a daily basis. Then there are policies we have to go after, such as Medicare for all, and such as elimination of student debt. Those policies all ride on this general attempt to create a new collective for the United States where people work together to make things happen. But having said all that, we have to do some collective action that will get us within 2 or 3 years to the point where we're doing something significant about the climate, because that's the area where we have no more time. And that's the context in which I think that dump the incumbents is so important, because only a movement like that can get us a Congress in 2 or 3 years that will begin to do something about the climate. In Biden's Build Back Better Act, when it comes to what is supposedly going to be done for the climate in that act, it's pathetic. It's pathetic. I mean, no credit is due for that. It falls so short of the goals we had when we first began to talk about a Build Back Better Act. We can't accept something so pathetic and be satisfied with it for a year. And that's why the Democrats are going to lose so badly, because they fail to deliver on that stuff. So we have to totally reject that, and we have to massively change the political system in order to get a Congress that is going to respect the climate and respect our need to survive. And this Congress doesn't do that. These incumbents don't do that. They've accepted the system. Many of them have reluctantly accepted it, but the bottom line is, rather than change it, they would just sit there and take it. And we can't have congressmen like that. And we can't have senators like that. We can't have office holders like that. We have to have people in office who will act as if this is a true emergency, in the way that people acted in the Second World War. Everybody knew it was an emergency. Everybody knew they had to sacrifice to get there. Everybody knew they had to come together to win that war. We have to come together to win the climate emergency. And we only got 2 or 3 years to do it.
Somebody find FDR's ghost. I mean, we really need to find somebody, because what we're getting. Do you think that Buttigieg is going to Buttigieg, however you want to, whatever his name is?
Yeah,
Do you really think? Do you really think that he's going to do it with Kamala? Nobody thinks.
No. I mean,
nobody thinks that. Not even the people that are going to run that campaign think that. Nobody thinks that.
Choices. Those are ridiculous choices.
Don't accept them. We can't accept them. We can't accept
that. If they nominate them in 2024, at that point, We just have to
Mm.
break this party.
I'm going to Europe.
There can be no question of voting for this party. We have to make it known that that party is dead. That it does
I don't
not
even think
deserve.
it's a party situation. It is the American people have to start telling the parties what it is that we need. Because we're sitting here waiting for the talking points to come out of the DNC, and it is a joke. Okay? If we sit here and we wait for that, shame on you. We need to drive what this election is about. And I
We need to
cannot
make our own
implore.
talking points, and we need to force those talking points down their throats.
Yeah, I cannot implore to all of us, everybody who is out on social media, all the people that we know, all the broadcast people, all the podcast people, all the journalists, everybody that we know. Do not let them tell you what this election is about. We have enough time. We need to start telling them. If we don't do it now, we can do this. If we unite together, we've got to do it together. You have to come up with what is the most, what is it that you are going to vote for? From a president, a senator, a governor, your dog catcher, your county council, I don't care. They all need to support what? And don't get crazy. You need a couple of things, big ones, whatever's important to you. But we have to drive those narratives. What's the most important things? Come up with 3. If you got to do 4, 4. 10's too many. It's got to be real. And we've got to get behind this stuff. Obviously, we have got to do something about carbon emissions. Carbon neutral by 2030, carbon negative right the hell now. We can do that. We can go carbon negative now. Now, 2030, my ass. We need
and 2030, my ass too.
We need healthcare.
It needs to be
right?
done in 2 or 3 years.
Housing, damn it.
That's all the time we really have.
All of these things, okay? But if we don't do, we've got no more time. It's now or never. If we sit on our asses and don't do something to say, no, MSNBC, shove your narratives where the sun don't shine. We are telling you.
Yeah, that's
this
a
is what
network
we
that
need.
needs to die.
This is what we need. This is what we want. If your mother is sitting there in front of MSNBC or CNN all day long and you don't want to talk to her because she sounds like she just consumed 3.5, 4 hours of MSNBC, if she is lucent, tell her that. Because now is the time. If you don't start having those conversations, it's over anyway. We are literally out of time. If we do not get the climate under control, we're going to breach 1.5 degrees Celsius and way beyond it. And we have so little time.
Yes, and then we're going to have to kiss our asses goodbye.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, okay, what do you want to be? You don't want to have this talk with your mother or your father or your neighbor or your best friend or your sister. We're out of time. We're out of time. Love that person in your life enough to have an honest conversation. And don't look at them as your enemy. Look at them as someone who you love and have that discussion. Period. And you know what? If you can't have that discussion or you don't care enough to have that discussion, you're probably the problem.
Yeah. So, on that note, that's this week. For next week, what I suggest we do is talk about through the states.
Sure, we should. We should.
And
we should have Laura on because there's a whole push now. They've identified 4 states that we're going to get behind.
Okay, so let's have Laura on Tuesday, okay, if she agrees.
Yeah, and we've got to get the other 2 bills. Mass is one, Washington is one. We've got to get the New York Health Act, and we're going to have to go through the analysis that we have because that's all we have.
Yes.
And And then there's another one, and I can't remember what it is. Oh, CalCare. We got to go through CalCare. We got to look at that too.
Yep.
I don't know if you want to go through CalCare and the New York Health Act, and then
For next week, I think I'd like to talk to Laura, um, just about the movement to start with. Then on Thursday, but we can go through the New York Health Act, uh, and then maybe on Saturday, it's AD 1400, isn't that the number of the California?
yeah, you know what, Joe? I think we need to do a little research and put our heads together on it before we decide what date we're going to talk about it.
Okay.
Honestly, I mean, that's important before we go gangbusters, because we're not dealing with the state that's got a Gerald Friedman standardized review. I think we're going to need a little more time to dig it.
Yeah, I think we're going to need a little more time to dig it too. And I think in the case of the New York Healthcare Act, we're going to have to grok their financial plan, because they already have a financial plan, and I'll almost bet that it's going to be an inadequate financial plan. But in any case, we're going to have to do a critical analysis of it.
And if we've got to reach out to Gottfried, we should probably do that because he wrote it, right?
So maybe we should have him on.
Oh boy, wouldn't that be beautiful? Let's see if we can do
Thursday.
that.
On Thursday, we can see.
Or whenever we can get him.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Hey, everybody that we didn't even look at comments tonight, I apologize. I didn't even look.
Well, I did. I looked at, comments. I think, I don't think there were too many that were on the subject that we were talking about here tonight. Okay. There were a lot of new people just generally chiming in with things that were not in line, at all. They just sort of came around to advertise some things. So there weren't the usual significant messages that we get from time to time from our people. So I didn't see really anything that was particularly relevant, okay, to the discussion that we were having here tonight.
Okay.
Well,
that's good.
Well, I don't know if that's good, but we can, I think, say goodnight.
Okay.
And say we'll see you all again on Tuesday, and hopefully Laura Fielding will be our guest then.
I just want to say, I think this was I was so excited to talk to Bob. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. I'm so excited that we have this relationship with him because we should have him again.
Okay, there's one thing I'd like to ask you to do.
Mm-hmm.
I sent you a link to this piece I wrote in 2009, okay, The Maladaptive Giant.
Oh, I read it.
So didn't you think that was very much in line with what Bob had to say?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it was identical. It was the same kind of thing. The reason that I was so excited about Bob is that Bob is going through different mediums, and he's sitting in New York and New Jersey.
Yes, he's sitting in New York, okay, in New Jersey, and he's coming at it from the standpoint of a very granular approach, but to reality. And he's coming at it from a bottom-up standpoint.
Yes. Yes.
And I was not taking that particular standpoint, okay, in this article. It wasn't that I was taking a top-down standpoint, but I was looking at things from a complex adaptive systems point of view.
Yes.
But it's interesting that we pretty much ended up at the same place.
He is totally on our page. And I love when you find an ally like that, especially when New York and Jersey. I mean, think about the voting, the sheer voting volume that man has been broadcasting in and working in for 30 years, and he's on our page. And there was nothing that man said that I disagreed with. And everything that I've read and watched so far about him, I agree with everything. He's an
Isn't that
ally.
interesting? Isn't that interesting?
It is. It
And I
is.
think that's because he is coming from the bottom up. I think that's why we agree with almost everything he says.
I mean, this is a beautiful relationship. I hope it keeps going for a very long time.
Well, we can make it keep going. I'm sure if we continue to invite him, he will continue to come for these conversations.
Yep, I hope so too, Joe. But I think that he's right there. He's right there with everything we're doing between Red Berets, bottom up, healthcare, everything, every point, dead on. He's right there. Reverend Barber, the whole 9 yards.
Yep.
So
Yeah, I
new
feel the
allies.
same way about Reverend Barber. Did I ever tell you the story about there was a campaign for the American Future Conference back in 2013 here? I think it was 2013 or 2014. It was a one-day conference, and they held it, okay, in DC, okay, and Bonnie and I went, and they had this speaking lineup at this conference. Keith Ellison, Bernie Sanders. They had Elizabeth Warren when she was at the peak of of her popularity. They had Larry Cohn, the head of the Communication Workers Union, who was there too. He's quite a barn burner, actually, when he speaks. And then right at the end, they had the Reverend Barber,
Mm.
and he just electrified the place. Everybody was already excited anyway. I mean, because Bernie was there, Elizabeth Warren was there, uh, Keith Ellison, and so on. Just the whole lineup was so terrific. And then to cap it all off, they had Barber there. And boy, did he give a speech. He had us getting out of our seats. He was really terrific. Anyway, that was quite a little conference they had there at that point.
Did I share with you him speaking at Brigham Young? Did I share with you that video, Joe? I thought I did, but I don't know for sure.
No, I don't think you did.
He was
Share.
just at Brigham Young on the 30th of November, and I will send it to you. The third
Please
Reconstruction.
do, because he is certainly
Amazing.
one of my very favorites, if not my very favorite.
Well, Scott was invited to speak at the march that they're doing on December, I want to say 13th. I'm pretty sure it's the 13th. Anyway, down in DC. And I got an email today because I'm on the Poor People's Campaign email listserv. They are busing people for that march from the local, not the local, but the regional states. There is no bus coming out of Pittsburgh. There's no Southwestern PA bus, but there is one out of Cleveland, and there is one out of maybe it's Cincinnati. But yeah, and he talks, when he spoke at Brigham Young, he talks about a march that they are doing on the 16th of June, talking about a moral shock that they need to do to the American people and the government, to just get the focus back onto what we were talking about today: community, the poor, obviously, because Reverend Barber talks about the poor, but it's all the same thing. And we're talking about economic policy here, folks. It keeps people dirt poor, and it causes problems all across the economic spectrum, unless you are incredibly wealthy or wealthy, whatever, however you want to place it, right?
Yes, it keeps people dirt poor, and it keeps us fighting each other.
Yes.
And we
Yes,
got to
it does.
we have
It's
to.
like, that's it, right? So I'm gonna keep looking through Bob's videos of interviews that have been done on him. The one that I shared with you today, I thought was pretty amazing. In 20 minutes, you get a full spectrum of where he stands even though it was 10 years ago, it's spot on.
Yeah, sure.
Spot on.
Yeah, because things haven't really changed, okay, in 10 years.
They haven't. Well, some things have changed for the worse, but when he was going kind of broad spectrum,
Yeah, but
macro,
the
micro,
general interaction of forces, okay,
Mhm.
is still the same. Okay, it is
Mhm.
worse now because the domination of the mass media
Yes.
in terms of their alliance with the politicians, I
Well,
think
and the
it's worse
sheer
now
corporate
than it
profit.
was
Yeah.
then. Yeah, and of course their dedication to maximizing corporate profits is just incredible now. It's just so corrupt. They don't
Uh-huh.
care about the news at all. They don't care about the truth at all.
No, they
All they
don't.
care about is the clicks.
We
All they
just got to get to that tipping point where we figure out how to get everybody on the same page. We need to tell them what we're going to vote for. Don't wait for them to tell you. We've still got time to drive what the talking points are on this election.
Yes, we do.
We do. So anyhow, I love everybody, and thank you for being here. And Joe, thank you
Okay.
so much.
I'm sorry.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very, very welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're very, very welcome. I had a wonderful time.
Me too. It was great. We need to send Bob a thank you letter. I will.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Good night. Thank you for being
Okay.
here.
Good night, folks. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for coming.
See you
And-
tomorrow on Knit the Revolution. Right? No,
No,
it's
that's
Saturday.
Monday.
Monday, 5 o'clock. Knit the Revolution.
But tomorrow we have our meeting at 5.
Yes, we do, and I will be there.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
I will see you there. Good night, everybody.